James Melendez, thank you for joining me on my show today, James All About Business. I'm going to talk about project charters, guiding teams to clarity and success. Stay tuned. So this is a great passion of mine. I love to, be obviously organized for those people who know me. And thinking about charters, I think they're really ideal instruments. So you're going to see on the title slide here, it says project, and then it shows a star. And charters, really it's talking about, charters are not just for projects. I'll get into that in a little bit. But ultimately, in this particular video, I'm going to talk to you about in terms of this, presentation. So next I'm going to show you the presentation. After that, I'm going to show you a template that I've been using for years in many organizations that's been very successful in creating charters and engagement for those particular charters that have been executed. So I've been executing these successful charters for years. So I've learned in many organizations that a charter is only successful as it is written and executed and followed up on. So, organizations that are high-functioning organizations tend to be happier with the charters they develop and create a culture where charters are expected. So they're obviously expected in projects, but they can also be expected in other places as well. Maybe an organization that's a startup might not be using a charter, or perhaps they're not using the charter to its best use, and perhaps it doesn't have all the elements for success. So charters are not just for projects, they are for initiatives, work streams, programs, educational teams. So anytime you think of the word team, how could you use a project charter? So how could you use a team charter to get that team to operate more efficiently? Now, when I think about when to initiate, you can't use a charter all the time because you don't have enough time to execute a charter for everything. So as a leader, a manager, or an individual contributor, you definitely know what's important. So if you're a leader, you might really be insisting that a charter is utilized. As a manager, you want to utilize this as a tool. And as an individual contributor, you might want to, manage up if you can, if your manager is really looking towards a methodology. And even if they're not, you could suggest one. So here, I think charters need to be distillated. So as I mentioned before, charters are not just for projects, and you have to pick them carefully. So I picked an initiative here, for example. So right here I picked this project, which is to save 10,000 hours over 5 years. And then this is really just distillating some ideas. This isn't an actual project that I'm doing right now, but it's really to think about, what are the most important ideas that you can put into your charter to be executable. Now, some organizations use charters and some do not. Some use very brief ones and one-pagers, as you see right here. And interestingly enough, I've been in rooms where a charter is actually not just typed in terms of the team that's executing to a particular activity. It's really being done in terms of somebody writing it down. Imagine that even here in 2020. But this is one where I thought was interesting. I pulled this one because it has a RACI, so something to be responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And so I don't even recommend using a RACI unless it's a well-developed organization. I wouldn't even recommend that on charter. So this is one that I pulled, and I thought, are people, really pulling these out from, the cloud, if you will, and executing them? My thought is, to a certain degree they are. I think you have to really pick and choose what's important to your charter. And as a project manager or a team leader or a manager in general, you really want to guide your teams to success. And you want to use your charter to be effective as possible. And so often I find that a one-pager just doesn't do it unless it's for a very brief activity. I don't recommend it. I'll show you my template and give you some ideas of where to go to with that. So, when to initiate. So when I initiate a project charter or team charter, I do so in terms of when it is approved. So maybe the particular initiative has been approved or the project has been approved. So usually, if I'm the person who wrote the proposal and I'm writing the project plan, I'm going to put together a team, and it's usually the people who are participating in that project or initiative to think about what they want in that charter. So I don't ever want to write it by myself. So I don't want to, write a charter that's something that lives on its own without me getting their input, because it's really about the team accountability and everyone working together to make that particular initiative a success. So charters really help organizations to understand the why. Why are we doing this? So you might have a team member who's joining your project, but they still don't understand the why, and they might ask about the why more than once. So one thing I definitely do is I put the why in the charter. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this initiative or this particular workflow, this work stream? And it really helps to give accountability to team members. It makes everyone accountable because everybody can point to that document, because everybody who's involved in that project or initiative has signed up for this. Now, talking about scope management, what's in scope, what's out of scope, that seems definitely obvious. So it really looks at, clarifies team roles and responsibility, reduces confusion, increases clarity and transparency. So these are just a few benefits that you can get from implementing a charter. It's really thinking about a charter as something for the past, so people can have access to what you wrote, because I think high-functioning organizations keep their charters and keep them visible for anybody who wants to utilize them in the future. They're for the present. How do you operate today? And they're for the future. It's something to think about how you might, look at a charter in terms of how you implement that for future uses. When I look at a charter, I think about visibility to leadership team, executive teams, as well as stakeholders. It also has a plan for accountability. It's also really thinking about this in terms of if you're a project team member or an initiative team member, you can look at this in terms of it's going to be remembered, say, in a talent review or a calibration meeting. When you think about a successful project closure or initiative closure, it'll highlight in, say, your talent review as well as your calibration, your yearly increases and your merit increases. So it's to think about what you did in your charter, what was successful, so to keep that moving forward in future charters. Now, it's also to develop teams and to lead to greater engagement. If your teams, and perhaps often I find, if you are a project manager, you might involve the same people again and again. And that's because they're the subject matter experts. They really know how to work through a particular item on a project. So if it's a highly technical organization or it isn't, you really do need SMEs. And perhaps over time, that SME is really going to be pivotal, and that project team member or initiative team member is really going to think about how you implemented that charter and how they can use that for future use as well. So success is not an accident. It is a result of intention. That's what success really, really means. Next, I'm going to talk about the project charter template. I like this particular document because I think it really highlights a way to think about this. So while it does say project charter in the middle, you can think of this in terms of, say, initiative, workstream, team functions, programs, internal organizational agreements, many ways of utilizing this. And again, you can't use this for everything because you wouldn't have time to put together a charter for everything. So I definitely don't have one pager. Sometimes they're up to 8 pages. So when I use a project charter, the point on that is to utilize this in terms of specific areas you want to talk about in detail. But you're not going to write a contract. This is not going to be a 40-pager. So if people think they can get away with a 1-page project charter, I would also say, did you have a 1-page mortgage agreement? Probably not. And would you want one? Probably not, because it may not be in your favor. So I won't talk about each of these until I get to each specific page. So when I look at purpose, I talk about this, and I definitely put the purpose in there. While you might have a project plan to lean on, this might be a better way of putting this in here. So maybe you want to talk about pain points, the stakeholders. Who are they? What is a project plan? Talk about the future and current state, and also talk about maybe some milestones and kickoff dates that you might have. What is the duration of this particular team initiative or project? Who's the sponsor? Who's the leader and manager, project manager or leader? Sometimes they're the same person, often they are. And you're talking about the team members, as well as resources and budget. Also, I definitely put in scope in here. What is the project or the initiative addressing, the team activity addressing? What are some descriptive statements you can talk about this? And I list them here, so I just, set up in validation of QMS. But I also definitely put in here what is out of scope. You can't list everything, but what you can list here are things that are going to be really obvious. So you really don't want to, do things that are really going to take your project or your initiative off the timeline. And you definitely want to accomplish what you want to do. If there needs to be a second or third project, then so be it. Your executive team or your leadership team will decide on that later. Now think about desired outcomes and objectives. So you want to put that in here as well. What is a monitoring? What is your stakeholder management plan? What is your risk management plan? What are the deliverables? What is the work that you're going to be giving to the organization when the project or initiative is completed? And what are your measures of success? You definitely want to put that in there. So desired outcomes and objectives, you can actually pull this out of your project plan. talking about maybe some very high-level things that the project is to complete. The monitoring, stakeholder management, risk management, deliverables. What is the work you're going to give to the organization? Measures of success. So measures of success, be very specific. And it's a great way to, think about this in terms of what does the organization want to see? What would you want to see if you're maybe in a room talking about this particular project, or you're maybe a department team member and you're learning about this project for the first time? So you also want to look at, recommendations. What are things you can do in this particular document that you can think about in terms of, yes, we want to think about this in terms of an annual review or semi-annual review, an audit. Perhaps there are potentials for phase 2 and phase 3 projects. And then you want to look at your project team. You want to talk about where they're located, and that's because very logical reasons. When are you going to have your meetings? You want to make sure if you have a team that's in, say, Central European time or Pacific time, you want to make sure that those team members are available for the meetings that you're going to be having. Who's the executive sponsor? And then ultimately you want to look at in terms of, what are the team norms? What is the onboarding, offboarding process? You want to talk about onboarding, offboarding of your team members. What does it look like in terms of that team, especially if it's a long multi-year project, or maybe it's just a one-year project? There will be people who roll in and roll out. So you should plan for that. It does not have to be exhaustive. It could be a paragraph or less. So when I talked about RACI, which is responsible, accountable, consulted, as well as informed, you want to think about that in terms of you could actually do a lot of modes of communication. Think about your audience, your stakeholder, their requirements, and frequency, mode of communication, especially if it's a multi-year project or initiative or a work team or team group effort. You really want to make sure you bring that out and cover that. Now, I did, in particular groups, I've had this up to maybe half a page or longer. Depends on how extensive that particular project is. So one element I put in here is the tech stacks, documents, and document standards. I do that because maybe not all team members are going to be using the same tech stacks, and that's a really important feature to think about. You want to make sure you make it easy for your team to succeed as much as possible. Where is document management? Where is it located? Do you have specific requirements on naming conventions? You also want to make sure you list your team meeting minutes as well as meeting attendance, decision log, action registry, and so forth. And also talk about standards. Maybe there's a logo. So if it's a multi-year project, you'll have a logo. And if you don't, you should consider doing that. I think it's a really nice touch. But also, your PowerPoint templates, your Excel templates, and other templates as you need. Where are they? And the standards that your team utilizes. And definitely get your signatures, especially in today's Zoom world. You want to make sure you do this. You can do this through DocuSign and other methods as well. But definitely, it's really that point where that team member has said, yes, I'm involved. And of course, the executive sponsor needs to sign off on this as well. So that's very important to have. So if it's a longer initiative, a longer project, I will definitely use a revision history because there's always something that's going to be updated. This should be transparent, available to all team members, stakeholders, as well as your executive sponsor. Now this I utilize in input because I think it's important to think about. Revision history on many documents is really essential to help for clarity and so people don't misunderstand what is occurring, and it's about really keeping your team informed of decisions or changes that are being made or updates to a charter. And also distribute the charter. So don't just write it and have 2.0 or 3.0, but definitely distribute that to the team so they're aware of those particular changes. It's not going to make a huge difference, but I think team members will really appreciate being involved and being informed. So this is really some of the things I wanted to talk about initially on this particular charter document. I think charters are very essential today to think about in terms of team success. I've seen a lot of organizations not utilizing charters correctly. I've seen organizations who maybe look at it once and maybe go beyond the scope, and maybe that time is a laggard and it goes on for a very long time. So we've all been involved in multi-year projects or initiatives, and I think it's nice to have a document to keep that in its swim lanes so that you can manage the project and it's not managing you. So thank you for watching today. I really appreciate it. Questions and comments down below. What are your ideas on charters, and what points do you use a charter or you don't use a charter? And have you used a charter outside of a project? I'd like to know that as well. And give me any general thoughts you have on this video, any comments you might have. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.